Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. Glad to have you. If you are a first-time listener, welcome to the program. Welcome to our universe. And please comment, share your thoughts. And oh, by the way, I'm not bashful. I'm a well-dressed beggar. So today you can see I actually have a collar on, and I will beg for ratings. So if you feel like we're doing a good job, hit us up with a 5. We like those. It helps us positioning in some of the podcast platforms. Okay, so before we get into today's guest, I always like to say, I've got too many interests for just one lifetime, and therefore my problem is around every corner there's another discovery. So today we've got a discovery, very unique individual. But before we go there, let's house cleaning out of the way. Don't forget to subscribe when you're listening. Don't forget to give us high ratings. Again, I am a well-dressed beggar. Don't forget that we are distributed on over 23 different podcast distribution points. We have listeners in 32 countries and 6 continents. And if I could figure out how to market to penguins and let them listen, we'd have that 7th continent, if I could talk today. Okay, so all the house cleaning out of the way. We got a great guest here today, an amazing story. Can't wait to get into this. And so our guest today is an author. Okay, he's a frequent podcast appearance person. So a lot of people like to hear his story. He's a positive change agent and coach. He helps people with positive change. He is the founder of Spark. And so I'd like to introduce to the show today our guest, Rick Orenlas. Rick, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Rex. Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Great. Well, you know how we play this, because I know you've listened to an episode or two. We want to hear the backstory, the story behind Rick, because we're all accumulation of our experiences, our environments, and our talents, but a lot of those environment things add up. And so we'd like to go back in time. But before we do that, could you quickly drop out a website or social media link that you'd like to be able to people connect with you? Because we do have some people who play along.
Yeah, thank you for asking. The best place is isparkchange.com, and it's just the letter I and then spark change. And coincidentally, that is the same on all social media channels. So
Fantastic.
Instagram, Facebook, everywhere, it's just isparkchange.com.
Fantastic. That's great. Okay. So to get to the iSpark change, we're going to go back in time. We want to know things like, and don't worry, I'll ask the questions if you forget this list because it's a little long. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Because that's not always the same. I had a guest on the show who moved 63 times before she was 15. Then, what was your family like? Do you have siblings? Do you have siblings that survived your harassment? What type of things did you do growing up? Sports or theater or dance? Whatever happened to be the interest, computers, reading. We want to know about that. Heck, even if you were a shoplifter, we want to know about that. I had a guest who was a car thief as a kid. So we want to know about those things. I'd like to know about the influence of your parents. Okay. What type of work did they do, and do they do? Okay. Because that creates a lot of things of culture in our environments. And sometimes that motivates people in different ways. Sometimes it's support, and sometimes it's, well, doggone it, I'm going to prove you wrong. So if you could, Rick, then we'll hopscotch from there. If you could, Rick, could you take us back to where this all started? Where were you born?
So I was actually born, I think there was a movie back in the 90s, back in the 90s, but I was born in East Los Angeles. So I was born in East LA.
East LA, oh wow.
I was born in East LA, actually. I'm from Los Angeles, and I grew up in Burbank, California, in Southern California. However, I had an aunt that helped to run that hospital in East Los Angeles, and so that's why I was born in East LA,
East LA,
even though it was nowhere near home. But I'm the youngest of 5, so
wow.
4 older sisters, and I grew up with a family with a very father who was a disciplinarian, for sure. But he did that with a lot of love, and family and faith always came first in our family. So anything it was always about family. Anything he ever did, anything he wanted any of us to do was always about your family, about supporting your family, and about faith as well.
Okay.
And supporting others. and so, and my mother was the same way, very, very strong faith, very strong beliefs in terms of being able to accomplish anything,
Sure.
which she helped to impart in me from a very young age. So being the youngest, I always felt like I was the one who had something to prove, right? I always
Yeah.
had to
Yep.
try harder, or even though I had sisters, but I always had to, not only was I the only boy, which they kept trying until they got one. And then, that happened to be me. But I was also the youngest. So I always tried my hardest in sports, always wanted to please my parents.
Okay.
Very active from a young age, doing various sports, whether it was football or basketball or running, cross country, just different things. But we had very modest upbringing. I
Sure.
remember when I was very small, someone dropped off at our school some flyer for it was some kind of martial arts training, and I was like, "Oh, Mom, I want to do this," and she's like, "Sorry, we can't afford that." And so it was always, very, very modest, and within limits, which later in life, I mean, that's portrayed where I've always wanted to give my kids, my two daughters, the world.
Sure.
So a lot of
So,
us do.
quick question for you.
Yeah.
There's two of them here. One, what type of work did your father do?
My father he was an accountant. He was
Okay.
the chief financial officer for a airline that only had one office in the United States. So it was an Australian airline, but they only had one office in the US. And so he was the CFO essentially just for that office, not of the whole airline.
Okay.
And my mom, she worked for the phone company. She was back, when they had, 411 operators you'd call and
Oh yeah.
get information. And then later on, when that kind of went away, I mean, she did all sorts of businesses and all sorts of things, always
Okay.
changing from one to the next.
Now, the second question I had on this little spot is, how was it like growing up with four older sisters? I mean, my goodness, you're a man on his own island.
Yeah, I will tell you, I was spoiled in a sense, Rex,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that they always wanted to take care of me. They always wanted to make sure that I was okay and everything. So nurtured,
Mm-hmm.
if you will,
Sure.
by
Sure.
all the females. And at the same time, I really feel that they helped me to grow the emotional side of of my personality.
Right.
And I really think that's why God probably chose to give me three daughters of my own, because he felt I could handle them and and raise them.
That's great. Well, you're a real parent. I have five, and I always tell people one is a novelty because it's 2-on-1. Two is man-to-man defense, so that's not so bad. But three, it's a flooded zone, and you're overwhelmed. So after three, it doesn't matter. You can have as many as you want because
Yeah.
you're just living in chaos. So a little bit then, you said you did a lot of sports and things like that. And then so after you graduated from high school, did you graduate from high school there in the LA Basin?
Yes, in Burbank. I went to Catholic school up through
Okay.
high school.
Okay.
That was very important for my parents, and it was something that they couldn't really afford too well. It put a
Yeah.
burden, but it was so important, for them that we did that. But I remember even at school, I'd have to, like in high school, because we were, I don't know, given some financial assistance from the school, that I'd have to, set up chairs in the auditorium
Sure.
before events and things like that.
Providing a little service for in kind then.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. All right. So then after high school, what was your next stop?
Well, I went to USC, the real USC, not the one in California, University of Southern California, and that had been a lifelong dream of mine,
Wow.
because my grandfather, my mom's dad, was an alum from the class of 29, I believe,
Oh, wow.
and I remember going when I was a teenager. I remember going before I graduated high school. I remember going to a football game. I would go to all the football games with him.
Sure.
And I remember it was homecoming. We go to an alumni table, and I'm there with my grandfather and my mom, and he was the only living alumnus from his class, from his
Wow.
from the dental school. And so he was the only one still around at that time, and he was probably like 90 at that time.
Wow.
But it had always been a part of, where I felt I was just destined. I'm going there no matter what.
Right.
And, thankfully I got in and I
Well,
was able to go to school there.
USC is so steeped in tradition, much more than a lot of the other Pac-12 schools. And when I grew up, I'm 55. I was born in 65. That was tailback U. That was
Hmm.
absolutely tailback U. And there was a kid here from Fairview that went out there. Gosh, I'm trying to remember his name, but yeah, that's always been a great program. And the other thing I've always loved and respected, because I'm a football nut. Okay, I played a little college football. My sons had a stellar high school, and then injuries after that. So big football head. I love that USC has never stepped away from the traditional uniforms. There's just something about that.
Yeah.
And I got mad at Nebraska recently because they stepped away and started adding all these colors and goofy helmets and stuff. But you look at Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, USC. They just haven't fallen into the Oregon nonsense. So I've
Yeah.
always loved USC, and so I cheer for them all the time, except when they play the Buffs. But other than that, I love it because of they've stuck to tradition, and there's something I really like about that.
Yeah, and I think I always like that too, Rex. I appreciate
Yeah.
you sharing that. And if you could see my desk, you can see that I have, my little cabinet with all my USC memorabilia in here,
Yeah.
it's over here. But
Well, and then the other thing too, you play for the team at USC. We don't have the names on the jerseys and all that
yeah,
kind of stuff. I love that. I think that's how it should be. My dad was always the kind that said, don't be a trash talker. You get up, you hand the ball to the ref, you act like you've been there before, and let your play talk for you, not be sitting around thumping your chest and all that kind of stuff. So I guess I'm just a little too old school.
no, I agree 100%. It's one of my favorite sayings, let your play do the talking.
Yeah. So what did you study at USC?
I studied communications and marketing.
Okay.
At the time, I had these grand ideas that I was going to go, like take over some advertising agency and, and become famous, doing ads for huge companies. And um, I I was on scholarship, so
Okay.
I needed to, be buttoned down. So I worked full time, and then I went to school full time, and I was able to finish in 4 years, thankfully.
So was that an
Graduate.
academic scholarship or was it sports or?
Academic, yeah,
Okay, fantastic.
academic scholarship. Yeah, I wanted to play football. Now, I'm a little over 5'8". At the time I was like 145 pounds, and
Yeah.
I went to one meeting and they're like, "Yeah, come back and see us when you put on like 25 pounds."
Yeah.
And I was fast, but they were like, "Yeah, we don't want you to get hurt, kid." So I was
Yeah.
like, "Okay."
My sons were standout all conference, honorable mentions for state and stuff like that, but they were 5'9". And, my son was tied for 10th in the entire state of Colorado for tackles. But who's going to take a 5'9" linebacker?
Yeah.
They just aren't, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes we just aren't blessed with the physical abilities to match our stuff. Okay.
Mhm.
So after school, what was your next stop? Did you get a quick job out of school? What was your next stop in life?
Yeah, I wanted to start working right away. I was
Mhm.
like, well, I need to start working. Need to start working right away. Had a bunch of interviews, and just because it was something that it seemed like a fun environment. I ended up working for Enterprise Rent a Car. They had this, they tout this management training program and all this
Sure.
stuff, and it seemed really fun. So I went to work there for a few years, learned sales. Quickly moved on from there into medical sales and more advanced type sales.
Okay. So pretty safe to say you didn't have this big stressful upbringing. You have a solid family. You weren't wealthy or anything, but you weren't starving, and you were able to work your way into work through Catholic school, because that's different than the public school system, that's for sure. And then to be able to get an academic scholarship and work at the same time at USC, that takes some fortitude. But yeah, you pretty much, I wouldn't say a golden child, but you certainly didn't have massive struggles to that point in life, right?
Well, one might think that,
Okay.
but uh, but the reality was that from the time I was, as young as I could remember, I mean, my father, as loving as he was, I mean, he was a terrible alcoholic,
Oh,
um, and that put immense pressure on my family, to where my parents divorced when I was 13. So
Okay, well, I missed the mark on this one then, but that's kind of
so
a
so
loaded question because we can unpack it from there. So,
yeah,
was your dad
it
an alcoholic the entire time, that you remember in growing up?
probably, I mean, the oldest memory I have involving him and drinking is when my mom had thrown us all in the car. So I must have been, I don't know, 6 or something. She had, with all my sisters, she had thrown us in the car and had driven down the street to go find him because he had left and was walking, or stumbling down the
Yeah,
street. And we're like
right.
a block from my house, and she's trying to get him to come in the car. And that's the very first memory I have where I was like,
Mm.
oh yeah, something was wrong there.
So did his being the disciplinarian, I think I know where this could be going, possibly. Being the disciplinarian and mixing that with alcoholism, was there physical abuse in your childhood?
Actually, no. Actually,
Oh,
there wasn't. Yeah, a lot of verbal,
sure.
verbal abuse, but not in the way that, not in like the movie sense. He never belittled us or anything like that. The main thing was just yelling, right? He would
Yeah,
just yell and raise his voice and get upset, but it was always like with that backhanded love or support, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because I
Absolutely.
guess internally, I don't know if he drew those lines or that's just inherently, was important for him. But
Well,
I mean,
good that he did. I had some experiences with my father who was a rather explosive temper, and that explosive temper turned into some physical things. And so it's good that you didn't have that. That's great.
yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like your mom was a single mother. Did she have custody of the kids? Was she kind of on her own, raising the family?
Once they divorced, it was joint custody, and we actually, I kind of went back and forth.
Okay,
I'd spend 6 months with my dad, and I went and live with, go see my mom on the weekends, and then I come back, and it was just like a lot of back and forth.
okay,
You know,
okay.
it was crazy. This is just something just funny about society. Is I remember when they went to court about custody, and my my mom was going to get custody, initial custody, and they were ordering my father to pay, thousand
Yeah,
dollars in child support or something,
right.
and they were making roughly the same amount. But then when it switched and my dad was going to have custody, then they ordered my mom to pay $50.
Wow. Different world, huh?
Yeah,
Different
different
world.
world.
Okay, well, I want to fast forward up a little bit because your story is so interesting. I'd like you to go into your story about your near-death thing and how that did some pivot points. We might come back a little bit to some other history, but if you will, can you honor us with the story that changed a lot of things in your life?
Yeah, it's interesting because last year, I'd say since last year, this time of last year, exactly a year ago, I've grown more in the past year than I had in probably my, 49 years prior,
Okay.
48 and a half years prior than that. But where it starts last year is when pandemic hit, right? So when pandemic hit and we are all in quarantine
Yep.
and in isolation and the world is shutting down, and my business coaching business had come to a grinding halt where one my largest client had said, look, we can't use your services now, we can't
Right.
afford that. My other clients had put things on hold. I realized all my revenue had gone away,
Yeah.
and I was starting to get anxious and depressed and very fearful of what was around the corner. And I quickly realized, because for the past few years, I had been going through a lot of personal development and everything and awareness. And I quickly realized, I'm like, you cannot go in this place. This is not a good place for you, for your family, for your well-being. And so I wrote a blog that was entitled How to Use COVID-19 as an Opportunity to Better Yourselves, to learn, to grow, to be grateful, to help others.
Hmm.
And in writing that, it reminded me that I wasn't living that way myself. And it reminded me of a book that had been in my head for 20 years that I had wanted to write and hadn't, for various reasons. And I realized then and there that I needed to write the book to, help myself and then hopefully help others and inspire others.
Okay.
Um, and that book, the story for that book. So, you know, I'll take you back, Rex, and I'll take you back a little bit. So the story for that book was 20 years ago when I was still living in Los Angeles. We're actually in Texas now, but still living in Los Angeles with my wife, and I had two daughters at the time. You know, my two oldest were 1 and 4, so they're very little. And we were driving back from a birthday party. It was about 2 hours away from where we live, and
Okay.
it started to rain like it never does in Southern California, where
Right.
torrential downpour, to where, you know, the wipers can't clear the water and cars are pulling off the road because nobody knows how to drive in that weather.
Yeah.
And we contemplated stopping, but it was getting dark. We didn't want it, you know, that would be worse. So we needed to get home. The kids were tired, you know, it was a Sunday night, Sunday evening. So we decided to just keep going cautiously. Well, I hit a pocket of water, started hydroplaning, and just lost complete control of the car.
Oh
So
my goodness.
start spinning out of control from the slow lane all the way across 4 lanes. We're heading towards the center divider. I'm trying to correct and do something
Yep.
because I don't want us to crash in the center divider. And we're screaming. You know, I'm screaming. My wife's screaming. We end up somehow veering back the other direction, and we start spinning across the other way,
Oh my
back
goodness.
across the 4 lanes the other way. We don't hit any other cars, you
Right.
know, surprisingly. We go off the road onto the shoulder, up a dirt embankment. It's like a slanted embankment, and we hit a cinder block wall at high speed, and we flip over
Hmm.
and we land back on the wheels.
Oh my
And
goodness.
we realize, like, okay, you know, I'm checking, and you know, my wife, okay, you're okay, and the the roof is smashed down, and the windshield is shattered, and the right side glass is shattered, and the car is filled with dirt from flipping, I guess,
Yep.
and my kids are crying now, but they're okay. And we
Hmm.
realize, you know, we're able to get out on my side, and we realize that they're unharmed, and an elderly couple had stopped, and you know, they had witnessed the accident, and they pulled over, and the lady wrapped a blanket around my wife because it was still pouring rain, and my wife's sitting there just crying on the side of the road, holding the kids and thanking God. And I'm talking to the gentleman, and he says, you know, that's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. I can't believe that you're alive and that you're
Wow.
getting out of the car. And even, you know, we left in an ambulance, you know, just in case, and the car was taken off. And even the next day I went back to the impound yard to get our things from the trunk because we had been
Sure.
traveling. And I go into the office and I tell the manager, yeah, I'm here to get my things. And he says, you know, what car? And I was like, the one outside on the flatbed, the one that's sitting right out in the front, you know, that black Grand Prix. And he's like, that can't be yours. I'm like, yeah, that's my car. He's like, no, you should be dead, or at least in the hospital. You know, he's like, I can always tell by looking at the car when,
Yeah.
you know,
How
what
bad
happened
the
to the
injuries.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, well, that's mine. You know, here's my paperwork. Like, it's mine. And, you know, and that immediately following that, Rex, was a great time of um, introspection, you know, for how I was living my life, you know,
Okay.
and I started realizing, like, I need to do a better job. And, you know, as a young father, and I was scared that I had, you know, could have potentially killed my family, and, you know, me driving. And I wrote myself what I called a to-do list for every day of how I wanted to live. You know, I wanted to serve others and treat them with kindness and respect,
Mhm.
and live like it was the last day of my life. And in writing that, as I was contemplating everything one day, you know, my mom had kept telling me, you know, your guardian angel protected you, your guardian angel protected you. And she gave me this little pin to put in my car, you know, my next car, to put on the visor. And as I'm, you know, was sitting there thinking about all this after I'd written that to-do list, I came up with the idea for my book that hit me in that, like a movie. Just clearly, I saw the story clear as day.
Okay.
And I was like, wow, this is a great story. And, you know, it's a fictional story. My book is actually a fictional story. It's not the story of what happened with us, but as I said, I need to write this. And I wrote like a page, and then I just went back with life, right? I started focusing on
Sure.
my kids and raising them.
Yep.
And I didn't do anything until last year, when I was, you know, pushed to that precipice, that breaking point, that I was like, I need to write this now.
Fantastic. So nobody had any injuries.
Nothing, nothing. My
Nothing.
wife, from the impact, she's like, oh, my shoulder's a little sore, but that was it. And it didn't, like, I don't even know if she had a bruise. Like it was
Wow.
nothing. Not a scratch on the kids. Even so, even when we went to the ER, the ambulance takes us to the ER, right? And we go in there and we're sitting there talking to the ER doc, and he says, well, your kids look fine. Like, they don't look like there's nothing wrong with them. Like, I can do some tests, some x-rays, whatever, but they really look fine. And, being a parent of two little kids, you're like, no, do everything. Right.
Yeah,
And
sure.
he's like, you don't need the cost, whatever. And I was like, no, please do it. And we even, I told the ER doctor, and yes, please do anything. I don't care, whatever the cost, just do it. I want to make sure my kids are okay. Because I
Sure.
was worried, right? Like, do they have internal damage? Is there something in their head, whatever, because of the, violent nature of
Yeah.
the crash. But they're like, nothing, not
Wow.
a scratch.
That's crazy. I can envision your accident because a couple of years back, and it was in a rainstorm, and very similar. There was one of these. It was a milk truck. Okay, so because still here in Colorado a little bit, we saw some companies that will deliver milk and the things. And he and a Ford pickup merged lanes into each other. Well, then they bounced out, and the big truck went into the center median, then back out and hit the wall because the place of the highway, but it was flared up, and it literally, when the truck came back, it took it up and it went up in the air and landed on its top. And I never would have thought a vehicle that size would be launched by that wall, but it absolutely was. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that guy didn't have the same story as you. He was hurt pretty good. I pulled over and ministered. So I can see your accident in my mind, and it's amazing that nobody walked out with any injuries. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was, truly a miracle in our eyes. And, I believe my mom 100%, about our guardian angel, so much so
Yeah,
that I wrote a book about that later. But yeah,
fantastic. So you ended up with when the pandemic hit. Were you in California then, or down in Texas?
no, we've been living in Texas since 2009.
Okay, fantastic. I've got a brother down over there in Austin, so love Texas, and I used to live down there. So great place. So you had some time to write, it sounds like, because you were all locked up. Your business was pretty much paralyzed at that point in time. How difficult was it for you to pick back up and write the book?
It was a challenge at first. It was definitely a challenge. And I'm a big, habits and goals and, task oriented. And so I was like, okay, let's do some research. What is it going to take? And you watch videos, read things, and you're like, oh, just write consistently, write,
Yeah.
500 words or 1,000 words per day. So I was like, all right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write every weekday. I'm going to write consistently every afternoon. And it started, it kind of was like this, right?
Yeah.
It started, and I was like, okay, I know how I want to start it. And then, kind of go through those lulls and stuff. But what happened, Rex, was about, I was probably halfway through, and I started exactly this time a year ago, in the early April, and it was beginning of June. And at that time, I started getting so incredibly spiritually connected.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that the story was being given to me. Like it was, I felt like divine inspiration because I was so spiritually connected and felt so close,
Mm-hmm.
to God spiritually, that I went from writing, those 500,000 words. I was writing over 2,000 in a couple hours. And
Wow.
I'm not a fast typist. So I was, just typing like it was being dictated. Um, and it just kind of poured out of me, to where, I hadn't given myself I figured, maybe it'll take 6 months, maybe it'll take more. I just kind of did the math and was like, okay, 500 words a day, and it's going to take
Yeah.
like, well, I started writing so, prolifically that I finished, by the third week in July, that it just,
Wow. Okay, so a very personal question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Were there any other attributes that sort of contributed to being connected to the Holy Ghost or Spirit, or whatever you want to, refer to, when we talk about the fact that had you upped prayer, had you upped service with church service, or was there any other contributing factors, or were you just getting this from the Lord?
I think it's two parts, right? So I
Okay.
think there's two parts to that. So I had been, I felt I was being called or pushed, or however you want to say that, to be closer to God for the past few years.
Hmm.
So my father, who, despite all his, his challenges of life, I mean, he was my hero, right?
Okay.
And he passed away in 2019 at the age of 96. So I
Wow.
had a long time to have him around, and we were very close. And I I remember when he had fallen and he was in the hospital, just a few months before he passed away. And the fall, kind of took him. He was living alone and doing great, and then the fall, took it all out.
Yep.
But I went to visit him because he's still in California, and I went to visit him, and I was spending as much time as I could, just spending a lot of time talking with him and discussing things. And I hadn't shared anything about this book with anyone.
Hmm.
Nobody knew about it, and I told him, "Hey, Dad, I'm thinking of I'm going to write this book, and I want to write this book." And he was so supportive and so excited that he actually pressed the call button to have a nurse come in just so he could tell her
Oh,
that
wow.
I was gonna write a book. And and so I think what really inspired me, and part of why I did complete it by the end of July, is he passed away on July 25th.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
when I started writing with such vigor, I was like, it would be a great gift to him, because I was dedicating the book to him. It would be a great gift to him if I could finish, by the anniversary of his death.
Sure.
And and so that's one part. And then the second part is the story is about an angel that is sent down from heaven, and he finds himself trapped in an elevator with 10 individuals, 10 completely different individuals from all walks of life, and he helps them each with a different challenge that they're facing in their
Hmm.
lives. And in writing about such deep content, if you will, and such
Sure.
spiritual content about this angel helping everyone, I think that helped me to connect, because yes, in essence, to answer your question, my writing was like prayer for me.
Okay.
Just everything I was writing, while it's just it's a fictional story, and it's not very religious, if you will, or anything. It's a regular story, but it has components of that in the story. But it just helped me to just connect, so well
Okay.
with everything.
Fantastic. So now, just a quick question, just logistics, just in my mind. Did you self-publish? Were you working with a publisher? Did you do a blended approach? How was that in getting the book out?
I wanted to get the book out quickly, because of the timing, because I felt, the world was kind of in this bad place, that a
Yeah.
lot of people were where I was, they were in that bad place. And so I wanted to get it out quickly. And so I thought, well, do I try to get a publisher? I think I have a good story. And a good friend of mine who's written 4 books on his own, he said, well, why don't you talk to my friend who's a publishing consultant? She has owned a publishing company, and now she helps people.
Mhm.
And so I contacted her. Her name's Martha, and I contacted Martha, and we talked, and we had a long conversation just like this. And she wanted to know
Sure.
everything in my story.
Yeah.
And she says, you know what? You need to get this story out as soon as possible. You need to publish this book as soon as possible, as soon as you can. And no publisher is going to do that for you. So
No,
you
they
have
take
to
a long time.
self-publish. Yeah. She's like, the fastest they'll get it out is like next year sometime. She's like, you have to get this out. And so with her help, we were able to get it out in, just a few months. And it was published in the middle of October.
Oh, fantastic. So how's the reception been on the book when people read it? What's the feedback you get?
It's been, thankfully, exactly what I've hoped for. It's
Okay.
been very well received. People are inspired by it. They're motivated by it. It's, if you forgive the pun, sparked change in their lives, or it's led them to, take up some new practice, like gratitude, for example. I had someone
Sure.
tell me the other day, they're like, oh, since I read your book, I'm starting to express gratitude on a daily basis. And that's all I wanted. I just wanted it to help some people in that capacity. And so, that's what it's done.
Fantastic. Now, do you have it out in like standard distribution? Is it on Amazon and online retailers? Where else can you get it?
Yes, it's on Amazon. It's on all Google Play, Ingram Spark, all the different. It's Kindle and paperback versions. It's
Fantastic.
anywhere. Yeah.
Well, I love Kindle books. That just makes it a lot easier. So, now you started the iSpark, founded that. Is that a companion program with the book? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much how it came about, Rex, is when I was going through that month or so of that deep spiritual connection. I was I would wake up at 2 a.m. with a flood of ideas, and I was having dreams and visions, and it was this crazy time of not only the spiritual connection, but like a time of creativity that I like
Hmm?
the ideas were just flowing out of me. I mean, I couldn't really stop. It's like a faucet that you're turning off, but it's just flowing out as fast as it
Just
can.
flowing, yeah.
Yeah, and in that time, I was writing about sparking change as a theme in my book, and that's where the idea, I felt I was being given this idea that I had to do more than just write the book, that I had to
Okay.
do more to help others, and so I created the organization I Spark Change to connect those and help spread positive change throughout the world and share with others that anyone can essentially spread positive change.
Fantastic. So how do you deliver that today? Is that courses online, webinars? What are you doing to deliver your companion courses and information with iSpark Change?
iSpark Change, it's continually evolving. So where it's started, where it's began, since October, is an online community. So
Okay.
website and the Facebook group where I share daily inspiration and scripture and messages of positivity and optimism and tips for people, and others can share as well. And the community is growing rapidly, but where it's evolving is I'm in the creation, about to roll out a course called Level Up Your Life, which, we both have children that are in Generation Z.
Yeah.
And um, I wanted to roll out some group coaching to help people that are going through challenges, especially now.
Okay.
And the more I started connecting with people, the more I've spoken to different individuals. They're like, you really need to focus on the young people. You really need to focus on the young people. I think you can help them. I think you'd resonate with them, and so forth. And I just kept getting pushed in that direction. So I've created a course called Level Up Your Life for Generation Z. And
Okay.
it'll be a 5-day workshop, and then there'll be longer group coaching, but it's to help them get from that feeling of being stuck or being kind of in that blah place that a lot of them are right now, especially after the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
to getting to where they can go back to really living. So going from like existing to living.
Yeah.
Uh,
Interesting. So, what's next? I mean, are you going to write another book, or is it going to be expansion of your iSpark Change? Tell me what's on the horizon. Everybody's got a new BHAG usually.
yeah, it's a little of both.
Okay.
So it seems like a theme for a lot of my answers, but yes, I am writing a second book, which, God willing, comes out later this year. But I was going to try to get that done by the middle of the year, but with all the other things I'm working on, I said, you know what, that'll be
Yeah.
more on God's time. And it's a follow up to 12 Hours of Heaven. I always envisioned that as two books, but in my time of inspiration, I had ideas for 5 additional books in the series. So
Yeah.
we'll see where those lead. But the bigger project is iSpark Change. And so what I'm doing is growing that community now, building that community, building that movement, because what I want to evolve it into is the world's first social media platform that is connecting those that are doing social good and spreading positive change. So if you look at the top 100 social media platforms across the world, I don't know if there's any in that 7th continent of yours with the penguins, but if you look at the rest, the other 6 continents, it doesn't exist, right? There's
Right.
smaller groups, there's groups on Facebook, there's smaller communities, there's nonprofits, there's all these things, but there's not one central hub to connect all of them where people can share what they're doing and connect with others that can possibly support them with their knowledge or resources or information, and that's what the evolution of iSpark Change is going to be, is into that social media community.
Fantastic. Because, when you go on the traditional sites today, it's basically the bad news channel. And, it's the argument venue, and it's the pointing out things that are wrong. And yeah, you get a few posts here and there of updates about someone's kids or accomplishments. And thank goodness we're really past the meal selfies, the pictures of everybody's food and stuff like that. But it's not a positive platform. And I know when I'm away from any of the current big ones, I feel a lot better, because it's just a bad news channel. And here's the challenge that they have. They've written the algorithms to keep you in that same bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that you go into those things, the more bad news they feed. So if you click on to read an article, you've just told Facebook or Instagram, hey, he wants more of this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so you generate that. And then of course, they've got the listeners on your phone and things like that. And so these are really precarious times. And I think they're out of control, in my opinion. And I think there's so much room for new, because what's interesting, see, I've been in technology for 35 years, and things come and go. All right. So everybody thinks that like Facebook's going to be here forever, or Twitter, or, YouTube, whatever, but those all change. Okay. I can look back across my career, and this is factual. When you have a software platform or a technology that first comes out and they become the leader in that technology frame, when the next technology advancement happens, the leaders never, and I mean never, translate to be the leaders in the next generation, because they're so busy hanging on to what they've got. Their
Mm-hmm.
founders have made money. They're kind of in that whole world and that kinds of stuff, and the world leaves them behind.
Mm-hmm.
I could basically pave the streets of Boulder with logos of technology companies that have come and gone. And the same thing's going to happen in social media.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, the handwriting's on the wall. All the negativity, all the censorship, just over ads and those types of things, people are done. And they're just waiting for those next big things, because they won't do it. And now I think, because of the censorship that they've gone down the route of, I think that's the nail in the coffin, because I think a lot of people, we're Americans, here in the United States. I don't know how people would look at those platforms in other countries, but we're Americans. We want to have freedom of speech. We don't want someone to be filtering news or updates and stuff. I just recorded a rant a couple of days ago. It doesn't come out for a little bit, but I have to be on social media for my business, so I'm on there all the time, because I coach a lot of traffic things. And I literally commented, our little governor here in the state of Colorado was yapping about the fact that 2 million people had been vaccinated so far. Colorado is just under 7 million people. So, he's, talking about that progress. And these were the words I commented on his thread. 2 million lab rats, ?
Mm-hmm.
I was censored. I was put in Facebook jail.
Wow.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? I didn't make an accusation. I wasn't calling for violence. 2 million lab rats ?
Yeah.
So I fought it. And they did say, oh, you're right. But their algorithms, because it was related to COVID, they picked it up and said that. So we can't have that kind of stuff. There's just no place in the world for that. There just isn't, flow of ideas. So I think you got a great ambitious thing on there, because I think the world's ready for good news. I mean, we've had nothing but horrible news for the last 12, 13 months. It's been terrible.
Yeah. I agree. And I think the AI has gotten out of control.
Yep.
Like you said, the AI has just gotten out of control where the programmers can't even reel it in some situations. And that's why I want to have a platform where people, it's not going to be for, it's going to be a different platform. It's going to have a specific purpose, right? For connecting people with positive change. So it's a combination of probably 5 different platforms that are out there right now, little parts from each of them.
Yeah.
But, I truly believe that it will be a safe place that people can go, that people can, it will help to raise the collective tide of humanity.
Yeah.
Is what part of my mission is, that if you help one person on this side of the world, and this organization over here, and this one over here, and this one over here, that, just collectively you're raising the tide, even if it's ever so small, right? Even if it's imperceptible, eventually, right, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, whatever, maybe it's made a difference, a
Yeah.
dent in humanity.
Well, I think what's going to happen, I don't think we're going to have, again, this is just my goofy prognostication because I've been in tech for a long time and watched all these things. I can remember going into an Uber office and talking to these guys, and they thought they were all that in a bag of chips. I'm like, guys, do you realize in 4 or 5 years, you probably aren't going to be here? There's going to be someone else. There's going to be another platform take over. But I really do believe, I don't think we're going to see, because of what's happened, and because of division and people are tired of things, I don't think we're going to see these big centralized platforms anymore. I just don't think we're going to see that.
Mm-hmm.
People want to be in like communities. People want to be with like thought leadership and those types of things. And so I think we're going to see a huge fragmentation of this industry, of the social media industry. And people are going to pick and choose the community that they want to be a part. And, we all need so much more positivity and people who are doing things to change the world, make things better. I think you're onto a great idea. I really do.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny because social media was supposed to be all about connecting people, but it's led to the disconnection of
Oh,
society.
division,
Yeah.
disconnection, division, saturation. And, the funny thing about Facebook is, and I'm a technologist, okay, so it was invented in these kids' college dorm rooms, okay, and Zuckerberg, wrestles control of the thing. They didn't talk to anybody with really big computer experience as far as databases, growth size, and stuff. It overran them. It absolutely overran them because they started off with this connecting people community thing, and it overran them. And I mean, literally, when they were drug in front of Congress and people were mad at them and suing them for selling data and stuff like that, if they really had any data architects when they built this thing, they wouldn't have been near the problems and stuff. But to
Mm-hmm.
me, in my opinion, is all the social media platforms are out of control. They're
Yeah.
just out of control. And I think if they had even Jack Dorsey, who comes from, making a lot of money in other areas in technology, I just don't think they understand what they created. And it's overrunning them. It just is
Mm-hmm.
overrun. And you can tell because they don't have a lot of answers for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then the things that they're interested are their motivations. I don't know if I like the word evil, but man, I tell you, there are some really questionable behaviors that are going on those platforms. And
Yeah.
for
I'd
me
agree.
to be the goof, nobody that I am, and to be censored for 2 million rablats, gosh, that just tells me something. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Or 4 words, four
yeah,
little words that are a
4 words.
comment on a post.
Yeah, so it's just crazy. Well, that's great. I really think you're onto something there. So, have you profiled the typical user yet? I mean, people who are interested in change could be of all ages, right?
Yes, and that's one of the things that I want. So I want it to be open to anyone. So it'll be individuals, groups, organizations, nonprofits, communities, companies, just anyone. The way I envision it is, and someone I was speaking to on another show, she said, "Oh, it's like a Match.com, but for connecting people that that are doing positive change." So each individual would have the ability to fill out a profile with their interests and the causes, and if someone is, you might be interested in technology, for example, and you have an expertise in technology, and someone else, they have a background in architecture, and someone else in engineering, and someone else in humanitarian efforts, and the plan is to be able to connect everyone, or at least to show how you can connect based on your interests, right?
Yeah.
That, here's some causes that you might like, or here's some entities that you might be interested in following. And then people will be able to post things that they're working on.
Yeah.
So if someone is working on, an engineering project in Saudi Arabia, and they're like, hey, we want to consult on this project, anyone who's willing to help us consult on this and donate their time, great. They're building let's say they're building a hospital or something, and they want to consult on that, then they can share their time. But it's really to, the world is so big, but it's so small with technology. And there's no reason that, an 18-year-old that has some idea, that's running some little nonprofit that he started, and I'll use my nephew as an example because he's exactly that. He started one at the age of 17, and now he's 18 running this little nonprofit in South Carolina. And if why should his efforts only be confined to his little area? Why shouldn't someone on the other side of the world see it and be inspired by it, or or want to know about it, or contact him and want to hear his story? I mean, and that's what I'm hoping to accomplish.
What's wonderful about the internet, and I'm not quoting anybody, but I think it's the great equalizer, because information can be equalized, access can be equalized, promotion can be equalized. Now, unfortunately, the internet's used for a lot of rotten things. Pornography and trafficking people and stuff like that. But if you really take a step back and look at it, there isn't anything that should be in a box anymore. If you get it on the internet, you should be able to get it out to lots of people. So I think that's great. So have you got to critical mass yet as far as what you're thinking as for iSpark Change?
Not yet.
Okay.
So we're building the community, it's Facebook community and on the website, right? Building the community that way.
Okay.
But and at the same time, I'm putting together an advisory board right now. I have a few members. I'm putting together an advisory board for, the evolution of the social media platform, and working on that. The reality is, if, like you said, it's that critical mass. If I was someone with a reach like Dwayne Johnson, for example, then I could create it and put it up tomorrow and it'd have millions of users in a day, right?
Yeah, right.
But the reality is, we need to build up the community first and start connecting and spreading, and there's power in numbers, and then launch the community from there.
Well, I'll throw you a tip that I would love to see if you're interested in taking a little input, is don't overrun the ads on it. You have to monetize it. I mean, these things cannot support themselves. And it was funny when all the leaders of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube were all drug in front of Congress, and people were surprised that they had ads and selling information. Well, duh, that's the business model, right? So as you do it, as someone who purchases a lot of internet social ads and stuff, if you do it tastefully and not overrun it, you'll have a lot more advertisers excited about it who will pay higher rates. That right now, I mean, most of those other platforms, they're so watered down because they're just too much. It's just too much. So take my 2 cents of insight for whatever it's worth, which is probably nothing. But if you do that, I think you can have a very tasteful platform that you can sustain. And when people, I don't know. Got a lot of friends, because I've been in the industry for so long, who've made just sick money. I mean, just, buy an island type money. Well, all of them have struggled towards the end of their careers to get rid of all that money, And so I always think it's like, well, how many zeros do you need in your bank account? I mean, you get to a point where you're looking for ways to hide it, protect it, give it away. And so, as iSpark Change does, I just hope you have the blessing of, keeping all that in a balance, because I think that's where a lot of our problems with the current social media platforms are. These people have made insane types of money, generation after generation after generation type money. And it's not that that's not needed. It's just, and I applaud anybody that reaches and chases their dreams. But yeah, I think there's a boundary for all that.
Yeah, and I agree. And thank you for the advice with the ads, because what I'd love to see is that, that is all minimized, that we have enough support from companies that want to be a part of it, or organizations that can help sponsor, sponsor the site and the platform, and that we don't have to have a bunch of ads.
Yeah.
And that there's philanthropists out there that say, hey, I want to support this and help grow and help see it expand, across the world. That would be, a total blessing if that were to come across, sometime down the road. Because there are people out there like that are looking for these types of opportunities.
There's a lot of them. That'd be more than you think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on today and sharing your story, giving us some really personal insight, because that's, when we ask people, or I ask people, me and my mouse, when I ask people about their lifestyles and their childhood and stuff like that, there's some vulnerabilities there, you know, to be able to share that your dad had struggles with alcohol and those types of things. So I appreciate that. So I have one last question that I ask all my guests. You know, we have this concept in the world called a bucket list. It's all the things we want to do before we depart from this world, and ambitions and dreams, and that would be cool. But in the universe, there's always an opposite to everything, right? So there's a list out there that is completely the opposite. So it's a list, it rhymes with bucket, starts with an F, but I'm not going to say that, okay? So it's a list that basically things I'm not going to do. I have no interest. So I'll give you a couple ideas off, you know, while you're thinking through that, because this is a question that most people get thrown when, and they're not sure because they weren't thinking about it, is like a couple items on my bucket list where I'm not eating sardines. Sorry, I've already been there, done that. Okay, nope, not doing sardines. I don't need to open a can and have my food have an eye that's looking at me. That's not interesting to me. I'm never going back to Mexico City. I actually went to meetings. We had to have armed guards to do business meetings. Okay, no interest. That's just too high risk. I live here in the shadow of 14,000 foot mountains. I don't mind hiking any of them, but I am not going to do any rock climbing, you know, and I see these guys that are up there with no ropes and stuff. Nope, sorry, close the door on that one. Not going there. So what might be an item or two that would be on your effort list that you're saying, nope, Rick's just not doing that?
Well, I'll steal one from you. Is that when I was a kid, I wanted to climb Mount Everest, and now I realize that I'm far too old. It's just not. It's not going to happen. You know, I'm too old to train and to go through that.
Well, and do you want to be the next popsicle that's buried in the snow up there?
Yeah,
right?
that starts. I don't know the medical term, but where you start losing awareness and you start taking all your clothes off when it's, you know, negative whatever, and then, you know, jump off the side of the mountain. I don't have any desire to
essentially do that. If you study that, because I've always fascinated you know, learning about that, because I live here in the shade of the Rockies, you start dying. You're basically, your body is shutting down when you get to that last, you know, set of elevation stuff. I'm like, nah, I think I can die on my own. I don't need to purposely pay someone $100,000 to help me get to a point where I'm dying and lose all sense and common sense. So that's a good one. I like that one.
Yeah. I when I was a kid, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. You know, it's one of those cool things. You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. I have no, I've seen enough movies. I have no desire to go to prison. So no desire to be incarcerated in any way, shape, or form. You know, low security, high security, whatever. That would just not be for me. You know, the only benefit I could see there is that I would probably read a lot and you know, expand my mind. But other than that, you know, there's just no benefit. I enjoy the outdoors too much and my freedom. And you know, the last one I'll go with is I have no on my list is I never want to harm someone or end someone's life. You know, harm someone seriously or end someone's life.
Yeah, those are all great. Very unique answers to the questions. Some people come up with some obvious things, but those are great. So thank you for sharing today, Rick. Thank you for sharing your strengths and the things you're doing and some of your vulnerabilities. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rex. It's been a really cool conversation, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Okay, folks, that's what we're going to call for a wrap today with our guest, Rick Orenlas. Today, it's been fantastic to learn his story. Don't forget to stop by his website at iSparkChange.com and then look for him at iSparkChange on all the social media. So as we depart, I always remind people to please stop by the show website, rexandrewshow.com. We have the profiles and information for everyone that appears on this show. So our previous guests, our current guest here today, Rick, and then our future guests. We always have about 30 in the queue. And so if you got somebody you'd love to have interviewed, send them our way because we're always looking for those interesting stories because life is about those stories. So thank you very much for tuning in today. And until next time, I just have those always three things to say. Be safe, but be bold and make it a great day.